The wind, a dry and raspy breath, carried the scent of dust and distant, unfallen rain across the cracked alkali flats. It whispered through the skeletal branches of mesquite and the thorny arms of cholla, a lonely sound in a land that had forgotten the meaning of mercy. Anoli Tushka moved through this sun-bleached expanse with a silence that was part of the landscape itself. His moccasins left faint impressions in the rust-colored earth, a language only he and the desert creatures could read. For 2 days he had tracked the wounded buck, a creature of profound resilience, its lifeblood a scattered trail of dark rubies against the pale ground. It was a ritual of respect, a hunt not for sport, but for sustenance, an ancient pact between man and the wilderness that had shaped him. The trail led him toward the low-slung smudge on the horizon that was Bitter Creek. He had not intended to go near the settlement. The towns of the white man were places of noise suspicion and a kind of brittle order that always seemed one wrong word away from shattering into violence. He preferred the clarity of the wild, where intentions were pure and survival was an honest, if brutal, truth. Yet as he crested a shallow rise overlooking the town, a profound stillness met him, a silence far more unnatural than the vast quiet of the plains. The town seemed to be holding its breath. No children shouted in the single dusty street. No clang of a hammer came from the blacksmith's forge. The saloon doors were still the whinny of a horse absent from the livery. The entire population of Bitter Creek, it seemed, was gathered in the barren patch of earth they called Judgment Square, a place of grim reputation that lay between the splintering facade of the church and the imposing 2-story structure of Blackwood's Mercantile. They stood in a silent, rigid crescent, through their faces a mixture of fear, grim satisfaction, and a shame they tried to hide from one another. Drawn by a curiosity that felt more like a premonition, Anoli tethered his horse to a gnarled cedar and approached with the cautious tread of a wolf. From the edge of the crowd, he saw the reason for their gathering. In the center of the square, a hole had been dug in the hard-packed earth. From this premature grave, the head and shoulders of a woman emerged, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her matted hair the color of sun-scorched wheat. She was buried to her neck, left for the sun, the buzzards, and the town's silent condemnation. Anoli felt a familiar coldness seep into his bones, the chill of witnessing a cruelty that masqueraded as justice. He had seen it before in other forms, under other skies. But then his eyes caught a glint of silver against the woman's dirt-caked collarbone. It was a small heart-shaped locket, intricately carved with the image of a soaring eagle. The air left his lungs in a rush. The world around him dissolved into a searing, white-hot memory. The smoke was thick, acrid, stinging his eyes. The air rang with the crack of cavalry carbines and the high, terrified screams of his people. He saw his wife Lita, her hand outstretched, her eyes wide with a terror he had been powerless to prevent. Around her neck, glinting in the cruel light of the burning longhouse, was the locket he had given her, a silver heart with a soaring eagle. It was the last thing he saw before the world exploded in fire and loss. He blinked the harsh Texas sun, bringing him back to the present. The woman in the ground, Rose Peaton, was a stranger. Her face was not Lita's, but the locket. It was identical. A ghost from his past, a symbol of his greatest failure, was hanging around the neck of another woman condemned to die. He did not know why, but in that moment, the universe seemed to have presented him with a terrible echo, a chance he could not refuse. The hunter's quest for the deer was forgotten, replaced by a far more urgent and dangerous purpose. To intervene was madness. It was to invite the collective wrath of this town upon himself. But to turn away to leave this woman to her fate, while that silver heart lay against her skin, was to bury his own soul alongside her. His choice was no choice at all. It was a compulsion, a debt to a ghost that he had to pay. The crowd remained a silent monolith, and their judgment as heavy and oppressive as the noonday heat. At the edge of the square, a man in a dusty black coat and a wide-brimmed hat watched the proceedings with an air of detached authority. He was tall and lean, with a face that might have been handsome were it not for the cold, calculating intelligence in his eyes. This, Anoli surmised, was the man who held the town's fear in the palm of his hand. Standing beside him was a burly deputy, his hand resting possessively on the butt of his pistol. A cudgel of a man built for simple, brutal tasks. Anoli moved. He did not rush, but walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace that drew every eye in the square. The townsfolk parted before him, their murmurs a low hiss like disturbed snakes. He ignored them, his gaze fixed on the woman in the ground. Her eyes clouded with despair, and dehydration flickered open as he approached. A faint, questioning whimper escaped her cracked lips. "You," the deputy grunted, stepping forward to block his path. "This ain't your concern, Injun. Move on." Anoli stopped, his eyes lifting to meet the deputy's. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying the quiet authority of the mountains and rivers. "This is not justice." He said, his words clear and precise. "This is a grave." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. No one spoke to Silas Blackwood's men that way. The man in the black coat, Blackwood himself, arched a single eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. "The man has an opinion." Jeb Blackwood said, his voice smooth and cultured a strange melody in the dusty air. "By all means, let's hear it." "Sir, you are a stranger to Bitter Creek. What gives you the right to question our traditions?" Anoli's gaze shifted to Blackwood, recognizing him as the true source of power. He did not answer the question directly. Instead, he gestured with his chin toward Rose. "She needs water, or she will die. Her fate is in God's hands now." Blackwood replied, a pious smile touching his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "She was tried and found wanting. The community has spoken." Anoli looked from Blackwood to the faces in the crowd, the blacksmith whose hands were clenched into fists at his sides, the store owner who nervously adjusted his spectacles, the preacher whose face was a mask of sanctimonious certainty. They were afraid. He could see it in the way they avoided his eyes, the way they huddled together. They were not a community passing judgment. They were a herd driven by a wolf. Without another word, Anoli unslung the water skin from his shoulder. He knelt beside Rose, ignoring the deputy's sputtering outrage and Blackwood's watchful silence. He gently tilted her head back, uncorking the skin. The sound of the water, a cool gurgle, was an obscenity in the heat-shimmering square. He let a few drops fall onto her lips. Her tongue, swollen and dry, darted out to meet them. Her eyes fluttered a spark of life, returning to their depths. "I said back off," the deputy. Jeb roared his hand, finally drawing his pistol. Anoli did not look up. He continued to let the water drip onto her lips, a slow, deliberate act of defiance. "You will not stop me," he said, his voice still quiet, yet it carried over the entire square. Jeb Blackwood's voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. The deputy froze his finger tight on the trigger. "Put it away. Our guest is merely demonstrating a point about Christian charity. A lesson, perhaps, we had all forgotten." He stepped forward, his polished boots leaving crisp prints in the dust. He looked down at Anoli, his smile widening. "You have a compassionate heart, Mr. Anoli Tushka." "Mr. Tushka, a Choctaw name if I'm not mistaken. You are a long way from your people." Blackwood's eyes were like chips of obsidian, taking in every detail of Anoli's buckskin clothing, the knife at his belt, the quiet confidence in his posture. "You've given the condemned woman a drink. Your charity is noted. Now the judgment of this town must be carried out. Leave her. Anoli rose to his feet, coiling the rope of the waterskin. He stood a full head shorter than Blackwood, yet he did not seem diminished. He looked at the shovel left beside the hole, its blade still caked with fresh earth. No. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. The crowd gasped. Jeb's hand went back to his gun. Blackwood's smile finally vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "You misunderstand your position, Mr. Tushka," Blackwood said, his voice losing its silken edge. "You are an outsider, an interloper. Here I am, the law, and the law says she stays." Anoli's hand moved not toward a weapon, but in a slow, deliberate gesture toward the locket on Rose's neck. That locket, he said, his voice thick with a memory only he could hear. "It means something to me." For the first time, Blackwood looked momentarily confused. He glanced at the silver heart, then back at Anoli, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. It was a detail he had not accounted for, a variable in his carefully constructed equation of power. Anoli seized the moment of hesitation. He took 2 steps, grabbed the handle of the shovel, and plunged it into the earth beside Rose's shoulder. The sound of the metal scraping against the hard-packed ground was a declaration of war. Jeb lunged, but Anoli was faster. He spun, using the shovel's handle to block the deputy's clumsy charge, sending the big man stumbling backward. The crowd surged back, their silence breaking into a cacophony of panicked shouts. This was not the orderly, sanitized cruelty they had been instructed to witness. This was chaos. Enough, Blackwood's voice was a whip crack. He drew a gleaming silver pistol from beneath his coat, its ornate engravings catching the sunlight. "Stop. Now." Anoli froze the shovel held ready. He was one man against a town, armed only with a digging tool and a ghost's memory. But he would not back down. He had backed down once before in a burning longhouse, and had lived with the ashes in his soul ever since. He met Blackwood's gaze over the barrel of the pistol. "The sun is high," Anoli said, his voice calm. "If she stays here another hour, you are not punishing her. You are murdering her." A tense silence descended once more. Blackwood considered him, the pistol held steady. He was weighing the cost. Killing Anoli here and now would be simple, but it would be messy. It would shatter the illusion of righteous order he had so carefully cultivated. It would turn his silent, complicit flock into witnesses of a cold-blooded murder. Slowly, a cruel, calculating smile returned to Blackwood's face. He lowered the pistol. "Very well, Mr. Tushka. You have a flair for the dramatic. You wish to save her. Be my guest." He gestured magnanimously at Rose. "Dig her out. Take her. But know this, by this act you take her guilt upon yourself. From this moment on, whatever fate befalls her, befalls you as well. This town has a long memory." He turned to the crowd. "The spectacle is over. Go back to your homes. The Lord's will has been amended." With a final lingering look at Anoli that was both a promise and a threat, Silas Blackwood turned and walked away, his deputy trailing sullenly behind him. The townsfolk, uncertain and afraid, began to disperse, casting furtive glances back at the lone Choctaw warrior who had just overturned their world. They left him alone in the square with the half-buried woman and the oppressive weight of the Texas sun. Anoli plunged the shovel back into the earth. The work of saving her had just begun. The work of surviving what came next was a problem for later. The earth was hard and unforgiving, baked solid by a sun that took without giving. Anoli worked with a steady, rhythmic economy of motion, his muscles cording under the strain. He dug not with frantic haste, but with a focused intensity, each shovelful a small victory against the grave Blackwood had made. Rose Peaton watched him, her eyes barely open, her breathing a shallow, ragged whisper. The water had revived her just enough to comprehend her own rescue, but she lacked the strength to speak, to question the strange miracle of this silent, determined man. When he had cleared enough earth to free her arms, he put down the shovel and knelt, using his hands to carefully scoop away the remaining soil. He worked with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the calloused strength of his fingers. Finally, he was able to pull her free. She was limp in his arms, her body trembling with shock and exhaustion. Her dress was ruined, caked with the red dust of her would-be tomb. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing and carried her away from the square, leaving the open hole behind as a stark reminder of the town's verdict. His eyes scanned the street, searching for a place of refuge. His gaze settled on a small, weathered, clapboard building with a swinging sign that read, Dr. E. Vance, Physician. It looked as weary and neglected as the rest of the town, but it was his only option. The door creaked open into a room that smelled of stale whiskey, carbolic acid, and regret. A man sat slumped in a chair behind a cluttered desk, a half-empty bottle at his elbow. He was thin with graying hair and a tremor in his hands that was not entirely from age. His eyes, though bloodshot, held a weary intelligence. This was Dr. Elias Vance. He looked up as Anoli entered, his expression shifting from drunken stupor to guarded alarm. "What is this? Who?" He trailed off as he took in the state of Rose Peaton in Anoli's arms. He shot to his feet, a flicker of his forgotten professionalism surfacing through the alcoholic haze. Good Lord, bring her here. Put her on the cot. Anoli laid her down gently on the narrow examination cot. Dr. Vance stumbled over his hands, surprisingly steady as he checked her pulse and peeled back an eyelid. Dehydration, sunstroke, shock. What in God's name happened to her? The town happened to her, Anoli said, his voice flat. Vance flinched, turning away from the girl to face Anoli. "You're the one, the Indian in the square." I heard the shouting. He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've defied Silas Blackwood. That's like spitting in the face of a rattlesnake." She needed help, Anoli stated simply, as if it were the only explanation required. Help? Vance let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Son, in this town, help is a word Blackwood owns. He decides who gets it and who doesn't." He turned back to Rose, his focus returning. "I'll need clean water and bandages. There's a pump out back. And find some blankets in that chest." Anoli moved to obey his earlier assessment of the doctor's shifting. Beneath the layers of alcohol and fear, a physician's conscience still flickered. While Vance tended to Rose, cleaning her face and forcing small sips of water between her lips, Anoli took stock of their situation. He glanced out the grime-streaked window. 2 of Blackwood's men were now posted at the end of the street, making no pretense of their purpose. They were sentinels guarding a cage. Every road out of Bitter Creek would be watched. Blackwood had not been bluffing. He had made Anoli and Rose prisoners of the town. Rose moaned, her consciousness returning in painful waves. My father." She rasped, her voice a dry crackle. "They took him." "Easy now, child," Vance soothed. "Just rest." Anoli stepped closer. "Blackwood took your father." She managed a weak nod, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. He said we had to sell the ranch. Said we were behind on taxes we didn't owe. When Pa refused, they came for him. They said I was a witch for defending him." The pieces began to fit together in Anoli's mind. This wasn't about morality or justice. It was about land. A common enough story on the frontier, but Blackwood had cloaked his greed in the robes of piety, turning the town's fear into his weapon. The Peaton Ranch, Vance murmured, dabbing Rose's forehead with a damp cloth. It's north of here. Has the only reliable spring in the county aside from the creek itself, which is half mud this time of year. Blackwood has been trying to get his hands on that water for months. Then our first problem, Anoli said, his mind already working, is finding her father. Our second is getting out of this town. There is no getting out. Vance said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You don't seem to understand. Blackwood doesn't just run this town. He owns its soul. He arrived a year ago, a charismatic man with a deep purse and a silver tongue. He bought the mercantile, the saloon, even the bank. He promised order, prosperity. What he delivered was fear. Anyone who crosses him finds themselves ruined or run out of town or worse. The doctor's eyes darted toward the window. He has eyes and ears everywhere. Trust no one. Over the next few days, the doctor's office became a makeshift sanctuary and a prison. Vance, spurred by a purpose he hadn't felt in years, sobered up and tended to Rose with diligent care. Her physical strength returned slowly, but the terror in her eyes remained. Anoli acted as their guardian. He sat for hours in a chair by the window, a silent, watchful presence studying the rhythms of the town, the patrol routes of Blackwood's men, the faces of the people who scurried past, refusing to meet his gaze. He knew a direct escape was impossible. He needed an ally, a crack in the wall of fear that Blackwood had built. His mind went back to the blacksmith in the square, the man whose fists had been clenched in silent protest. A man with anger in his heart might be a man who could be persuaded to act. Under the cover of a moonless night, Anoli slipped out of the back of the doctor's office. He moved through the alleys and shadows of Bitter Creek like a ghost, his senses alive to every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of the wind. The blacksmith's forge was dark, the air around it thick with the smell of cold iron and coal smoke. A small house was attached to the back. A single lamp burned in a window. Anoli tapped lightly on the door. After a long moment, it opened a crack, revealing the broad, suspicious face of the blacksmith. He was a powerfully built man named Thomas Miller. "What do you want?" Miller's voice was a low growl. "I saw you in the square," Anoli said quietly. "You were not celebrating." Miller's eyes darted nervously up and down the alley. "Go away. I don't want any trouble." "Trouble is already here," Anoli countered. "Blackwood took the Peaton Ranch for its water. Whose land do you think he'll take next when the creek runs dry for good?" He saw a flicker of fear in the blacksmith's eyes. He had a family, a wife, and a young son. They were as vulnerable as anyone. "What can I do?" Miller whispered, his defiance warring with his fear. "He has a dozen armed men. I have a hammer." "A hammer can break chains," Anoli said. "I need information. Where is he holding Rose's father? What are his plans?" Miller hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. He pulled Anoli inside, closing the door quickly. "Blackwood's got old man Peaton locked in the back room of the mercantile." He said, his voice low and urgent. "He's trying to starve him into signing over the deed. And it's not just the water, stranger. Blackwood's obsessed with that land. He patrols it himself sometimes like he's searching for something more." He looked Anoli in the eye. "I'll help you. Not because I'm brave, but because I'm a father and I can't let my boy grow up in a town ruled by that monster. But we have to be smart. One wrong move and we're all dead." Anoli had his ally. The first crack had appeared in Blackwood's wall. Over the next few days, Miller became his eyes and ears, feeding him information gleaned from the loose talk of Blackwood's men as they came to have their horses shod. Anoli learned the layout of the mercantile, the guard rotations, Blackwood's personal habits. One evening, Miller brought him a piece of information that made the hairs on Anoli's neck stand up. "It's a strange thing," the blacksmith said. "Blackwood keeps this old tarnished cavalry saber hanging on his office wall. One of his men was talking. Said Blackwood's brother was a soldier killed in some skirmish with Indians down south years ago. Said Blackwood never got over it. Carries a burning hatred for natives." A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in Anoli's gut. A cavalry officer. A skirmish years ago. It was too much to be a coincidence. He had to be sure. He needed to see that office for himself. That night, Anoli planned his most audacious move yet. He would break into the heart of Blackwood's empire, the mercantile. While Miller created a diversion at the far end of town, a spooked horse that would draw the attention of the night patrol. Anoli scaled the rear wall of the two-story building, prying open a second-floor window and slipping inside. The building was silent, filled with the smells of leather, tobacco, and dry goods. He moved through the darkness with practiced ease, his feet making no sound on the wooden floorboards. Blackwood's office was at the front of the building overlooking the square. The door was unlocked. Inside the room was opulent, a stark contrast to the rest of the town. A large mahogany desk stood in the center, and the walls were lined with books. And there above the empty fireplace hung the saber. It was a standard-issue Union cavalry sword, but its hilt was wrapped in a distinctive pattern of worn leather. Anoli's heart hammered against his ribs. He had seen that saber before, glinting in the firelight as it was raised against him. His eyes scanned the desk. Among the neat stacks of papers, there was a small leather-bound frame. He picked it up. It was a photograph, a daguerreotype, of two young men. One was a younger, smiling Silas Blackwood. The other was an older man in a cavalry captain's uniform. The captain's face was arrogant, confident, and burned forever into Anoli's memory. It was Captain Marcus Kane, the man who had led the raid on his village. The man Anoli had killed to stop the slaughter. Suddenly, everything became terrifyingly clear. The name Blackwood was an invention. This man was Silas Kane. The seizure of Bitter Creek, the persecution of the Pitons, the public spectacle of Rose's punishment, it was all an elaborate, cruel piece of theater. It was never about the land or the water. It was a trap designed for one man should he ever happen to pass this way. A trap for Anoli Tushka. Silas had built this entire kingdom of fear on a foundation of personal vengeance, waiting for the man who killed his brother to wander into his web. And Anoli, drawn by the ghost of a silver locket, had walked right into it. The hunter had become the hunted. The knowledge hit Anoli with the force of a physical blow. Silas Kane had not just targeted Rose, he had chosen her as bait. The identical locket was no coincidence. It was a diabolical piece of staging. Silas must have found it among his brother's effects, a trophy taken from the raid from Leta's body, and had placed it on Rose's neck for Anoli to see, a lure designed to snag his soul. He felt a surge of cold fury followed by a profound sense of dread. He was not just fighting a greedy tyrant. He was fighting the ghost of his own past. Silas had been studying him, waiting for him for years. He would know Anoli's character, that he would not abandon a helpless person, that an echo of his past trauma would compel him to act. He had to get Rose and her father out. Now. He slipped out of the office, his mind racing. On his way to the back of the mercantile, where Miller had said Peyton was being held, he heard voices from downstairs. He flattened himself into the shadows of the upper landing. Silas Kane and Dr. Vance stood near the front entrance, their figures illuminated by a single lantern. "And you're certain he suspects nothing of our arrangement?" Silas asked, his voice a low murmur. "He trusts me." Vance replied, his own voice strained. He thinks I am his ally. He tells me everything. He plans to free Piton soon. He believes the blacksmith is his only confidant. A wave of nausea washed over Anoli. The doctor, the weary, broken man who had nursed Rose back to health, the man to whom Anoli had confided his plans, he was an informant. The one person he thought he could trust was a viper. Anoli's isolation was absolute. He was truly, utterly alone. Good Silas said, a note of satisfaction in his tone. Let him try. Everything is proceeding as I planned. Soon Mr. Tushka will understand the true meaning of loss. I will take everything from him, just as he took everything from me. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Anoli understood now the full depth of Silas's evil. It was a patient, meticulous, all-consuming hatred. He backed away from the landing, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He couldn't free Piton tonight. The building was no longer safe. The entire town was a snare. He made his way back to the doctor's office, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. As he approached, he saw a light moving inside. His instincts screamed. He peered through the window. Thomas Miller's wife, Sarah, was there, her face pale with terror. Dr. Vance was wringing his hands. Rose was gone. Anoli burst through the door. Where is she? He demanded, his voice a low growl. They took her, Sarah Miller sobbed. Silas's men. They took my son too. They said Thomas sent them a signal that he betrayed you. But he didn't, I swear it. They're taking them to the new saloon. Silas wants you there. He said to come alone. It was a pincer movement. Silas had anticipated his every move, using the doctor to stay one step ahead. He had taken Rose to force Anoli's hand and taken the blacksmith's son to neutralize his only true ally. Outside, the wind began to howl. The sky, which had been clear moments before, was turning a sickly yellow-brown. The air grew thick with dust, stinging Anoli's eyes. A dust storm was rolling in a violent, suffocating tempest. It was as if the land itself was mirroring the chaos that was about to be unleashed. Silas had chosen his stage for the final act, his newly built saloon, the gaudy monument to his greed and power, in the heart of a raging storm. Anoli checked the loads in his pistol and tucked his knife into his belt. He was walking into a trap, betrayed and alone, to face a man who had orchestrated this entire nightmare just for him. But Rose and a little boy were hostages. There was no other path. He stepped out into the swirling, blinding dust. The wind howled like a tortured spirit, ripping at the flimsy facades of Bitter Creek's buildings. Dust, thick as smoke, churned through the street, reducing visibility to a few feet and turning the world into a maelstrom of grit and shadow. Anoli moved through it by instinct, his hand covering his mouth and nose, the storm a fitting backdrop for the confrontation that awaited. The saloon, a two-story monstrosity of fresh-cut pine and gaudy trim, loomed out of the swirling dust, its windows glowing with a defiant, flickering light. He pushed the swinging doors open. The storm's roar was instantly muffled, replaced by an eerie, charged silence. The air inside was thick with dust that had seeped through the walls, catching the lamplight in hazy, dancing columns. Silas Kane stood behind the long, polished bar, a picture of calm control, in the heart of the chaos. Rose was tied to a chair near the center of the room, her eyes wide with terror. Across from her, little Daniel Miller, the blacksmith's son, huddled on the floor, his small face streaked with tears. Two of Silas's thugs stood guard, their pistols drawn. On the bar, directly in front of Silas, sat a lit kerosene lantern. It was precariously balanced on the edge of a large open crate. Anoli could see the telltale markings on the wooden sticks packed inside dynamite. enough to level the saloon and half the town with it. A clock on the wall ticked with unnerving loudness, each second a hammer blow in the tense silence. "Welcome, Mr. Tushka Silas," said his voice smooth and untroubled. "I was beginning to worry the storm might have delayed you. Please come in. We have so much to discuss." Anoli's eyes darted around the room, assessing the layout, the positions of the guards, the proximity of the hostages to Silas. He was outmanned and outgunned. "Let the boy and the woman go, Cain." Anoli said his use of the real name, causing a flicker of surprise in Silas's eyes. "Your fight is with me." Silas chuckled a dry, mirthless sound. "Oh, it is? But you see, Anoli, you took my future from me. You took my brother. It seems only fair that I take your future from you. Every time you look at this woman, you see your dead wife, don't you? I saw it in your eyes in the square. And this boy, he represents the son you might have had. I'm not just going to kill you. I'm going to make you watch hope die all over again." He gestured to the room around them. "I built all of this for you. I cultivated this town's fear, nurtured its weaknesses, all to create the perfect stage. I needed a place where a man like you, a man with a tortured conscience, would feel compelled to be a hero. And you walked right into my play." Outside, the storm shrieked, rattling the windows in their frames. The lamps flickered, casting long, menacing shadows that danced like devils on the walls. "My brother Marcus was a good man," Silas continued, his voice taking on the fervent tone of a zealot. "A patriot, bringing order to a savage land. And you, a coward hiding in the woods, ambushed him. You slaughtered him. Your brother was leading a massacre." Anoli's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "He was burning homes with women and children inside. I did what I had to do to stop him." "Lies." Silas roared, his composure finally cracking. He slammed his hand on the bar, making the lantern wobble precariously over the dynamite. Rose flinched, and Daniel began to cry softly. "He was a hero, and you are a savage. I'm going to prove it. You see, when this is all over, they'll find your body here along with the woman and child you tried to save. They'll say the wild Indian went mad, tried to blow up the town, and was put down like a rabid dog. My story will be the only one left to tell." The clock on the wall began to chime the hour. Silas smiled. "Time's up, Anoli. You have a choice. You can walk out that door and leave them to die. Or you can stay, and we can all be purified in the fire together." Anoli knew he could not reason with this man. He was locked in a battle with a ghost, a memory twisted by years of hatred. He had to act. He had to defeat Silas without becoming the monster Silas believed him to be. His eyes met Rose's. He saw her fear, but underneath it, a flicker of defiance. She gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was all he needed. In one fluid motion, Anoli drew his knife and threw it. The blade spun end over end, not at Silas, but at the rope holding a heavy chandelier directly above the bar. Simultaneously, he drew his pistol. The knife struck true, severing the rope. The massive iron chandelier crashed down onto the bar, shattering glasses and splintering wood. It missed Silas, but swept the lantern off the crate. For a heart-stopping second, the lamp flew through the air, a comet of fire. Anoli's shot rang out a deafening crack in the enclosed space. The bullet shattered the lantern's glass housing in midair, extinguishing the flame just as it fell harmlessly beside the dynamite. The room was plunged into near darkness, the only light coming from one remaining lamp in a far corner. In the confusion, Anoli lunged forward, using the overturned tables as cover. The two guards, momentarily blinded, fired wildly into the shadows. Anoli, moving with the silence he had learned in the wilderness, circled around them. He dispatched the first guard with a swift, non-lethal blow to the head with the butt of his pistol. The second guard turned, firing blindly. The bullet ricocheted off the brass footrail of the bar, whining past Anoli's ear. Anoli closed the distance, disarming the man and sending him crashing into the wall. Now it was just him and Silas. Silas, recovering from the shock, scrambled for his own pistol, which had been knocked from the bar. He came up firing. Anoli dived behind the thick oak bar bullets, splintering the wood above his head. He was trapped. You see, Anoli's Silas screamed over the howling wind. You are an animal. Violence is all you know. Anoli stayed low, his mind racing. He had to end this. He saw Rose in the dim light, struggling against her ropes. She managed to get one hand free and was frantically working on the other. He had to give her time. He popped up from behind the bar and fired not to kill, but to drive Silas back away from the hostages. The shot went wide, as intended. Silas returned fire, his shots becoming more frantic, more desperate. He was losing control. As Silas paused to reload, Anoli vaulted over the bar. He charged, closing the distance between them. Silas swung his empty pistol like a club. Anoli ducked under the blow, his shoulder driving hard into Silas's midsection. They crashed to the floor, wrestling for control of the gun. They were a tangle of limbs in the swirling dust and shadows, a primal struggle between two men consumed by the same long-ago tragedy. Silas was fueled by a mad, burning hatred. Anoli fought with a cold, desperate clarity. He was not fighting for revenge. He was fighting to break the cycle, to protect the innocent lives that Silas had put in the crossfire. With a final desperate heave, Anoli twisted the gun from Silas's grasp and threw it across the room. He pinned Silas to the floor, his forearm pressed against his throat. Silas's eyes, wild with fury and disbelief, glared up at him. Do it. Silas rasped, a crazed grin spreading across his face. Kill me. Become the murderer I know you are. Anoli looked into the face of the man who had tormented him, who had used the memory of his wife as a weapon against him. The rage was there, a white-hot fire in his veins. He could end it. He could squeeze the life from this man and satisfy the part of his soul that had screamed for vengeance for years. But then, through the dusty gloom, he saw Rose. She was free. She had Daniel behind her, her arms wrapped protectively around the terrified boy. She was watching him, her expression not of fear, but of trust. He looked back down at Silas. He saw not a monster, but a man broken by grief, his soul eaten away by a hatred that had left him hollow. To kill him would be to let Silas win. It would be an admission that they were the same. Slowly, deliberately, Anoli released the pressure on Silas's throat. He stood up, pulling the defeated man to his feet. At that moment, the saloon doors burst open, and Thomas Miller, the blacksmith, stood silhouetted against the storm, a heavy hammer in his hand. The townspeople, drawn by the gunshots and roused by Miller's courage, were gathered behind him, their faces illuminated by lanterns. Anoli shoved Silas toward them. This is your town. Anoli said, his voice ragged but clear. This is your prisoner, your justice. The dust storm began to recede as quickly as it had arrived. Through the saloon's windows, the first rays of a clean, dawn-like light began to filter through the haze, illuminating the wreckage of the saloon and the faces of the people who were for the first time free. In the calm that followed the storm, a fragile peace settled over Bitter Creek. The fury of the wind had scoured the air clean, and the morning sun rose on a town that felt both broken and reborn. The people who for so long had lived under the shadow of Silas Kane's suffocating control now blinked in the unfamiliar light of their own freedom. Silas, his face a mask of empty defeat, was locked in the town's small jail, his reign of terror over. Anoli stood outside the doctor's office, tending to a shallow graze on his arm, a minor price for the night's victory. The physical wounds were nothing. It was the deeper, older wounds that ached with a dull, persistent thrum. Rose emerged from the office and came to stand beside him. She held a cup of water, offering it to him. Their hands brushed as he took it as silent acknowledgement of the crucible they had endured together. "He told me about the locket," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "He said he took it from your wife. I am so sorry, Anoli." Anoli looked at the silver heart which he had taken from her for safekeeping and now held in his palm. It felt cold, a relic of a life that was gone. "It was not your fault. He used it as a weapon. He used my past to poison your present." "What will you do now?" she asked. It was the question he had been avoiding. For years he had been a wanderer, a man defined by what he had lost. He had no destination, only a direction away from the past. But the past had found him here in this dusty, forgotten town. He had faced it not with vengeance, but with a resolve to protect, and in doing so, something inside him had shifted. "I don't know," he answered honestly. The townspeople gathered in the square, not for a grim judgment, but for a true one. Dr. Vance was brought before them. He did not try to make excuses. He stood with his head bowed, his face a portrait of shame, and confessed his fear, his weakness, and his complicity in Cain's schemes. The crowd murmured, some with anger, some with pity. Thomas Miller, now a respected voice in the community, stepped forward. "He was a coward," Thomas said, his voice ringing with authority. "But he is not a murderer. We have seen enough death. Let him be exiled. Let him leave this town and never return and carry his shame with him." A vote was taken. The judgment was exile. It was a punishment that was harsh but not cruel. It was the beginning of justice, not vengeance. As Dr. Vance was led to the edge of town, with a horse and a single water skin, he looked back at Anoli, his eyes filled with a sad, profound gratitude. He had been given a chance to live a mercy he did not deserve, but one that might one day allow him to heal. Weeks turned into a month. The rhythm of Bitter Creek began to change. The fear was gone, replaced by a cautious but determined spirit of cooperation. Rose, with the deed to her ranch now securely in her name, proved to be a natural leader, her quiet strength inspiring others. Her father, frail but recovering, was home. Thomas Miller's forge became the heart of the town's reconstruction, its steady clang a reassuring heartbeat. Anoli stayed. He found he could not bring himself to leave. He had come here tracking a wounded animal, but had found a wounded community instead. He helped them. He taught them how to read the land, how to reinforce their homes against the harsh weather, how to dig irrigation ditches from the creek to their small gardens. His silence was no longer seen as a threat, but as a sign of his steady, thoughtful nature. His greatest project was helping Rose and Thomas engineer a new well for the town, tapping into the powerful, life-giving spring on her land. It was hard work digging through rock and clay under the relentless sun, but as they worked, a sense of shared purpose bound them together. They were not just building a well, they were building a future. On the day the well was completed, the whole town gathered. With a final turn of the handle, fresh, clean water gushed forth, spilling into the trough. The children cheered, splashing in the cool stream. It was a baptism for the town, a washing away of the bitterness that had given it its name. Rose turned to Anoli, her face bright with a smile that reached her eyes. "We need a name for it," she said. "The well." Anoli looked at the people celebrating at the life this water promised. He thought of the past of Lita and of the locket he still carried. The memory was no longer a searing pain, but a gentle sorrow, a part of him he could finally carry without being crushed by its weight. He had visited the unmarked graves of his wife and son in his mind, not with guilt, but with a quiet acceptance. He had honored their memory not by running, but by building. He walked to the sturdy wooden frame of the new well pump. He took the silver locket from his pocket. Its surface, now polished, gleamed in the sun. He did not open it. He knew the faces inside. Instead, he hung it securely on an iron hook on the pump's handle where it would be touched by every person who came for water. His past would now nourish the future of this community. "We'll call it Lita's Spring," he said, his voice clear and strong. Rose's smile was tinged with a deep, knowing sadness and a profound respect. "Lita's Spring," she agreed. As the sun began to set, casting long, peaceful shadows across the land, so gathered the townspeople. She stood on a wagon bed, no longer a victim, but a founder. "This well is just the beginning," she announced, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. "With the security this water brings, we can do more. Our children need to learn to read and write to build a world better than the one we knew. I'm going to use the profits from my ranch to build a school right here in the square where we once gathered for judgment." A murmur of surprise and excitement went through the crowd. A school. It was a promise of a future they had never dared to imagine. Anoli watched from the edge of the crowd, a quiet observer to the hope he had helped to plant. He had come to this place as a ghost, haunted by the past. He would stay as a guardian, dedicated to its future. The pain of his loss would never truly leave him, but here in this reborn town, he had found a way to make it mean something. Here he had found a place to heal,